Addy.
All right, thank you, Andrea. Welcome everyone to moving forward with racial equity, some updates on racial equity activities in our statewide system. There are 3 of us who are going to be sharing with you today. And get my slides working here. This, I think, is my favorite slide in our whole presentation. And I'm so glad that C was like, let's do Bitmojis. So that prompted me to update my Bitmoji, which is really nice. My name is Jodi, Jodi Versaw. I work with the adult ed team at the Minnesota Department of Education. And I will let C and Addy introduce themselves as well.
Hello, everyone, good afternoon now. Moua-Leske, I'm the program manager for Southwest ABE here in Marshall.
And hello, everyone. I'm Addy Wolbaum. I'm the DEI assistant for this grant and for the city of Marshall.
All right, thanks, C and Addy. So in terms of our agenda and our plan for the day, or for the next 45 minutes, we're going to start with some background. I'm going to start with some background, kind of ground us in where we're coming from. And then C and Addy are going to talk about where we are now and where we are headed in terms of racial equity in our statewide system. So I wanted to start excuse me. I wanted to start by thinking a little bit about our history and how adult education in a historical sense has been involved in movements for racial justice here in the US. And I've done a longer presentation about this in the past, and I just pulled a couple of things from that just to kind of ground us today. A couple of examples of how adult education has been a part of racial equity work historically. And these examples involved freedom for formerly enslaved people, rights for immigrant workers, and voter engagement. So I wanted to share this image with you. This image was taken in South Carolina on one of the Sea Islands off of the coast of South Carolina. In 1866, this is what was called a freedmen's school. So some folks who've done some work on the history of adult education in this country have made the assertion that the first time that the federal government ever funded adult education was immediately after the end of the Civil War, immediately after the Emancipation Proclamation, and during the period of American history that was called Reconstruction, where there was an effort to integrate newly free, formerly enslaved people into the broader community and society. And so this is an example of a school like that. These programs and schools, or that group of people was referred to as freedmen. And so this school was for those recently freed people to learn, basic literacy and math content. Moving forward a little bit in US history, this image is from the 1920s. And so in that period of American history, there were large groups of individuals from immigrants from many places in the world, especially Europe and Eastern Europe, but other places in the world as well. And there, during the 1920s, there were growing populations in inner cities in the US where immigrants were working and living in very impoverished situations. And out of that grew a movement called the settlement house movement, where there would be these settlement houses that were essentially sort of community centers in these, very overpopulated, impoverished neighborhoods in the inner city, and they provided a lot of different services to those communities, including adult education. And so, and English language instruction sometimes, and this was an example of a naturalization class. So these are, a group of folks from an immigrant background who were pursuing US citizenship. So again, an interesting tie to, we still do that same kind of work in our adult education classrooms now. And then one more image, this one is from the 1960s. So during the civil rights movement and after the civil rights movement, adult education again had an important role. This is what was called a citizenship school. And so these citizenship schools were programs that were organized in the South in response to Jim Crow voting laws that placed really onerous kind of restrictions around voting that were related to literacy. This particular image, what this shows is that in Alabama, there was a requirement that in order to be able to vote, one had to be able to sign one's name in cursive. So this adult education program was helping individuals to be able to get the skills that they needed to vote. And other states in the South at this time had different kinds of requirements around literacy, all of which, as we now know, were pretty much just designed to deny people who were descended from enslaved people access to the vote. So adult education programs in that period of our country's history were helping people get access to their right to vote. So then I just wanted to tie that to sort of what we have in law at a federal level that kind of defines adult education and funds it. So in the same period, in the 60s, there was a legislator from Kentucky who wanted to introduce an Adult Basic Education Act, or an Adult Education Act, that would at the national level formally fund and define adult education. However, because of the civil rights movement at that time, there were white legislators who associated that quote unquote adult basic education with those efforts to support Black folks in passing literacy tests in order to become registered voters. And because those white Southern legislators had a certain amount of power and they had a coalition, that act did not pass. Instead, what happened a couple of years later is a new act was passed called the Economic Opportunity Act. And adult basic education was sort of codified into that law as Title B. So what happened in that time is that adult literacy the shift was taken away from racial equality because that was contentious. And instead, adult education was viewed more as an economic issue. So that Economic Opportunity Act in 1964 really set the stage for all of the more recent federal laws that have defined and funded adult education. So there was a 1991 National Literacy Act, there was the 1998 Workforce Investment Act, or WIA, and currently at the federal national level, the federal law that defines and funds the work that we do is called WIOA, or the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So all of these laws continue to describe adult education in terms of economic impact. But I think it's important to acknowledge that at this point, we are in 2022, and I believe that we can see the both and here. Like, I believe that the work that we do, we understand the importance of the economic impact. We support that many students come to our programs and our classrooms because they want the employment opportunities that lead to, better living situations for themselves and for their families. And we fully support all of those efforts. And we can also understand and know that this work that we're doing really has some roots, some deep historical roots in racial justice. So currently we have a team of 5 of us, soon a team of 6 of us, who work at the Minnesota Department of Education, overseeing our statewide system. And our team has been thinking and talking, a lot over the last several years of what does equity look like in our system? What is racial equity? How do we do it? How do we know what it looks like? Those kind of questions, and they are big questions. And several years ago, we developed this statement as an understanding for ourselves of some of the things we're talking about when we say that we are working towards racial equity. I will not read that to you, but I will pause for just a second to give you a minute to look it over. You may have seen it before. I think the key to this statement is that very last sentence that says, we see ABE or adult education as key to building educated, engaged, and just communities for all Minnesotans. And by all Minnesotans, we mean everyone who is living in our communities here in Minnesota, regardless of their citizenship status. So as our team was really thinking about, okay, practically speaking, what does this look like? What do we do? What can we do to continue to move forward this work of racial equity in adult education? One of the things that our team does is that we are responsible for overseeing the 3% of state adult education funding that goes out in grants to fund the support network. So if you haven't heard of the support network, just to be clear, that those grants fund activities and organizations like Atlas, which is our professional development support network provider. That's the entity that is putting on this event today that we are attending together. It's also another of those grants supports Panda, which provides support around disabilities. The support network includes support for testing and for distance learning. So those support network services are available to everyone working in the system of adult education across our state. And in 2021, so last year, as we on the Department of Ed team were thinking about a sort of a new round of grants, we decided to reorganize and shift the funds a little bit in order to create a new grant opportunity to specifically support racial equity work. And so that's what we're here to talk to you about today. We ran that grant competition, and that grant was awarded to Marshall Adult Education. And the grant work has been led by C and by Addy. So I'm going to turn it over to them at this point to talk more about the grant itself.
Thanks, Jodi. Are there any questions about the history that Jodi gave before we dive into the goals? Okay, and if you have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat or any comments. All right, so when I had originally applied for the grant, these are kind of the goals that they wanted us to work on. And so I'll just go through it quickly. But so the first one essentially is creating that data analysis, which is the biggest component of the grant. And so I had to get a team and had to figure out how to get these surveys out and then collecting all that data. And then number two was to make recommendations and actions based on all the data that we collected from the analysis. And then three was creating 2 different advisory groups to help guide me through the process. So one is anybody that works in ABE, and it could be partners of ABE as well too, and that includes anybody from community ed and our workforce, our career force partners. And then the other one was of any former or current adult learners could be on the advisory group. Goal 4 was to work with the professional development coordination. So to join Astrid and the PD, their quarterly meetings. And then also just to provide some PD communications of, what kind of opportunities should we offer more? Where should we submit it? Adding resources. Oh, next. I was trying to go next and I'm like, I don't have control.
So far in the past couple of months, we have selected a consultant to help us with all the data analysis. We have formed those 2 advisory groups that C just mentioned. We also developed and administered 2 out of 3 of our surveys. We're completing our 3rd survey right now, and we're working on organizing future focus groups. And we're going to go into more depth about all of these activities in the next slides.
All right, so when I started this, I had to think of a consultant or who was I going to work with to get this data analysis done. And I originally had reached out to GARE and the Race Equity I participated in their racism cohort the year before that. And they had told me that they don't really do any consultant things like this, but they referred me. So I searched all high and low. I asked the U of M. I reached out to people that I knew that worked in equity things. And it was actually Jodi that suggested Dr. Rose Chu. She had seen her, she works with a few things. She's been in ABE, not in ABE as in like taught it, but she's worked around a lot with ABE. She actually, I think, was one of the hiring committees, I think, or the commission, and then helped hire Todd way back in the day. So she had a lot of background knowledge in ABE. And then she also does a lot of things with equity. So she's done trainings. I mean, some of you are probably familiar with her, but she's done some training for cultural competency. And so I reached out to her and tried to offer the little money that I had and did some begging. And she agreed to join us and be our consultant. And it's been an amazing collaboration between Addy and Rose and I, because Rose gets it and she can give us that knowledge, and Addy kind of helps out with a lot of that tech support, and then Rose comes with a lot of the equity education, and then I give a lot of that ABE, since both of them know a little bit about ABE, but not enough. So with that, it was a perfect marriage between the three of us to work together. But this is just some background information on Rose, and this is going to be provided for you later, so that way you can go back and read more about Rose and all the amazing accomplishments that she has.
Yeah, Rose has been absolutely amazing. So now back in November, we had our first meeting for our racial equity advisory group. And we didn't have too many applications for this. We didn't have too many people apply. So the list that you see in front of you, that's actually everybody that applied. And so we have these 8 individuals, and they're you can see the names. They're from a pretty diverse, from diverse parts of the state too. So they give good output, good input on what their area needs. And they've been really, really passionate about the work we're doing. And the purpose of this group is to kind of help guide us and assist us. We share what we're working on and we get their input and see what they think about it. And they've been very helpful.
And just to add to with the advisory group, we are going to start looking for new advisory members. So if any of you are interested, we're going to be sending applications out next month. Mm-hmm. So be on the lookout for that, or shoot us an email if you're interested, and we'll be sure to send you applications. All right, so the task of the advisory group is to assist and create the application for the learner board. So we thought, you know, when I created them first, and then other advisement of the MDE team is to kind of use them to help me figure out to get learners, because the only reach that I have is to the managers. And so if I reach out to the managers in this group here, then they can send it off to their teachers to send it off to any students that were interested. So that worked out really well. We did have just a little bit of a complication with that, and I'll explain it later when we get to the learner board, advisory board. They also helped selected the learner board applicants, which we had a ton. I think we had
67.
Yeah, 67. Contributed to continuous discussions on inequities in AB. So we just kind of talked about things, and that kind of was a springboard to helping us create the administration and the educator surveys, these just little informal discussions that we had. And then, so they helped assisted with the questions. And we did make sure that they didn't see the actual questions, the finished survey for the administrators and the educators, because then they couldn't complete the survey because they already have seen the questions. So we were very careful about making sure that they just see like a theme and kind of helping us frame it, but not seeing the actual questions. They are for sure seeing the actual questions for the learners and helping us with that. Mm-hmm. And then aiding us with analyzing data. So we've looked at the administrator data right now. The ones that are easy for us to do is more like the quantitative ones where it's like, you know, yes or no, whatever. But there's ones where there's comments, and it's a lot of information for us to try to, you know, make something out of it. And so the advisory group has been awesome in helping us find out themes, and even things that, you know, we didn't realize until we met with the group. And you know, it was really neat to see that. And it was really organic to come up with all the more information and more things that we didn't see before. Okay, next one.
So after we formed our first advisory board, we had to get our advisory board of the learners. And so this was fairly difficult because, like I said, we had about 67 applicants, and C and I quickly realized that with this work, we have to make sure that we're being really clear and really concise with what we're saying, because we had quite a few people that filled out those applications. They thought they were signing up for GED classes or for some other program. So that kind of created an issue right away. We weren't sure if these people we weren't sure if they were applying to be on the advisory board or if they wanted to do classes. So that was an issue. But then we looked through all of these applications, and we had to keep in mind that we wanted to make sure that this group was diverse in every way. We wanted to make sure that they represented different parts of the state. So we have a good mixture of metro and rural, and we also have 2 representatives from the DOC. And we wanted to make sure that the race of the individuals were diverse, and their age, their gender, their sexuality, their disability status, because we want to have those diverse opinions. We want to make sure that we're hearing about all of these experiences of the people in ABE. And after getting help from our other advisory group with selecting our top candidates, we felt really good about the group we have now. And this group has been amazing. They've been very open with sharing their experiences and what has and hasn't worked for them. And they've been really helpful with creating these surveys.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to what Addy said about all the applicants is that, a lot of these students thought when they were applying for a class, that they were going to get a $350 stipend to take a English class or a GED. So we had to go through a lot of it. And also too, we had questions on there, and we kind of had to make sure that we weren't creating a barrier by having them answer these questions. And so most of the time, you have to look at the questions and how they answered it. But at the same time, we also didn't want to limit that. Just because they couldn't answer a question doesn't mean that they couldn't be in the group, because maybe they might have more to say, but they aren't able to articulate it because of limited language. And we did offer translators. So we do have one advisory group member that does need a translator. And so we usually have him on, our translator on with that student. So if they have anything to say more that they can't express it, then we do have that translator for that. And again, this group is also going to be looking for new advisory members in the future. So if you know any students that would like to be on this committee or this advisory group, send them our way. All right, and then the task of the adult learner advisory group is share their experiences in ABE, their concerns. We had a lot of kind of informal questions and prompts for them to answer. And again, that really helped a lot in shaping our questions for the survey for them, because we weren't really sure even kind of where to begin with that. But as we were talking to them, then that really just took a shape of its own, and it helped out so much. And then they are providing some input on the present findings. We're realizing with this group that we are kind of limited in some of the things we can do with them because of the not necessarily like communication, I would say, but like the understanding. Because most of our advisory group members speak English really well. We just have a couple that are probably mid-level, but they still understand it. But it's just that conveying our message of what we want. So we don't have them do too much of the findings. We are kind of focusing more of just their survey and kind of questions what we need to come up with. We did have IMABE on. They wanted to get some students' stories and share it for the Day on the Hill advocacy, and we did have quite a few, I think almost.
Every advisory member except for one was able to have an interview with the #IMABE team, and those interviews were recorded, and they're going to be edited and showed to the legislators for the Day on the Hill event. And all of our advisory members, they gave such amazing answers, and everything that they said is something that's being talked about already in ABE. So they're aware of what's not working for them. And it's just great that we have those stories to kind of back up what we've been saying.
Yeah, it definitely makes a lot more powerful impact to our legislators and our senators that, these are our students and it's affecting them, and this is what they have to say. And then we're also using our adult learner advisory group to help us recruit for next year and for upcoming focus groups, and also kind of getting their take on, once we get this information, how should we relay it? Because again, I can only go through managers because that's the contact I have, and then how to get to the students so they could see all their hard work that they helped us with.
So for our administrator survey, we got a total of 53 responses back, and we were pretty happy with that. And while we were creating the survey, we needed a lot of help from our first advisory group. A lot of these topics that we talked about in the surveys, they came directly from our advisory groups. And we started with big picture things. So we wanted to hear what kind of categories or areas that we should target. And this is what we came up for our sections for the administrator survey. So we have section 1 talking about the organizational structure of the programs. We wanted to ask about student demographics and the staff demographics, and how they, not just do they collect the data, but if they're keeping up with it, and what they have in place to keep track of all of that. We wanted a section about talent management, and then another section on supporting and advancing equity. And then another comment with just general feedbacks, and then, another section with general feedback, and another section just asking more about them. And I think the main area that we have been really interested in was section E, about supporting and advancing equity. So far we haven't completely looked through all the results and finalized all of that, but it's quite clear that after looking at that supporting and advancing equity section, that not everyone has the same idea of what equity is, and not everybody really understands it. And so we've kind of realized that we need to start with awareness and getting people to know what this work is actually about before they start working towards it. And so that's kind of one thing I found interesting about the administrator survey.
Yeah, and some people felt like there was too much of it. And some were just doing it just to check off the box that we did it. And so this was a great start to our survey results so that we can help. I mean, we already have some ideas what we can do to make recommendations for policy changes and to the state. So you the next one, Jodi. Okay.
This is the next one.
Oh, this is the next one. Oh, okay, never mind. It looks exactly the same. All right. All right, for the educator survey, we had 123 responses. And kind of like with the administrator, we don't know the exact numbers out there. I figured there's 39 consortiums, and then consortiums are broken into different regions or sites. So the number for administrators I thought was really good turnout. And then an educator, I figured if it was more than 53, we're good, right? So we had 123, which was awesome. We were really pushing it out there, and thank you to all the managers that pushed it out there, to their teachers. Thank you so much. And then we just wanted to clarify too, the educator is not just limited to a teacher that is licensed. This was to paraprofessionals, volunteers. What am I missing?
Just all support staff.
Yep, any support staffs that worked with students. And so we didn't want to limit the educator. And that's why we didn't call it the teacher survey. We were really intentional about naming it educator. So we talked about their role. That one was kind of more of kind of figuring out, okay, who's working part-time, who's full-time? Do they have other jobs? How much of a contact do they have with students? Was it like salary? Like,
if they're on the payroll,
yes.
Just then, basic questions.
Yeah, because I don't think we know enough. Like, I learned a lot just reading about this, because all I know is my program, and then to read about other different programs and how they run it. It was very, very fun and eye-opening to read about that. And then we read about professional development. So in the administrator, we kind of touched on that too. And that was, do you offer all that? Now we're kind of on the other side, whereas do you get the training, and do you get it, and do you get to implement it? And so this is kind of like I guess kind of like a check to see if what administrators are saying is matching up with what educators are actually getting for training. Resources and accessibility. So this is kind of, make sure that they have the resources that they need to be able to teach equity in their classroom, and have the accessibility for their students. Teaching and learning, again, relating to that, do they have all the resources they need? Workplace conditions, I would say probably this one's more like their relationship with administration. You know, do they feel comfortable talking to their administrator about something, or do they have somebody that they can talk to about any concerns that they have? And the feedback and comments, this was kind of just in general, anything that wasn't covered. And then more about you. So we did a lot of demographics at the end of that one for the administrator and the educator. I know that in SID, they do ask that, but I know that was just an addition in the last couple of years. And I know that my teachers who have been here for much longer, probably 10, 20 years, we haven't updated their demographics, but I noticed my new hires, they have, because we're not thinking about going back and hiring, like we should go back and add it all, but I think we forget about it for the teachers that have been there a long time. We don't have their demographics on there. And so this was a way for us to kind of cover it and make sure that we have a better reading about it.
And also with that, after we got some of the results back from our educator and administrator survey, I noticed some people saying, why do you need to know my race? Why do you need to know my sexuality? Because we did ask, are you part of the LGBT community? We asked about if they have any disability. And some people kind of thought that that was intruding on them and it was too personal. But the reason we asked those questions is to see if our ABE staff is representative of the students that they teach. We want to see a diverse group of educators and staff and volunteers that accurately represents the diverse learning group. So they might have seemed like somewhat strange questions, but we asked them for a reason. Next slide, Jodi. And so now we are working on finalizing our student survey, and we're thinking about sending this out the first week of May, and it'll be due, I think we said May 16th. And these are sections for the student survey. We realized very quickly after we did the application for our adult learner group that we have to be very, very clear with the questions that we're asking. We have to make sure that they're very simple and straightforward so that even people with very low English skills could be able to interpret them somewhat. But while when we send these surveys out, we want to try to get teachers to have class time so that they can assist the students in taking these surveys. So if they don't have very good English skills, they can get some help from a teacher. So all of these questions, they were basic. I think all of them were directly from our conversations with our student advisory group. And I'm really excited for them to take the survey because they'll get to see that all of the work they've been doing is for something that's actually really important. So for section A, it's just about starting my ABE journey. We had a lot of conversation about the intake process was really difficult, not enough support during that process. There's a lot of talk about making sure that students are placed in the correct level and not just thrown somewhere that they don't accurately match. And then section B is supporting my ABE journey. So this is about like the resources that they receive, whether it's about textbooks, pens and paper, or mental health accommodations and assistance, stuff like that. And also if they have a good relationship with their teacher that they can ask for support when they need it. And then section C is what I am learning. So this is about the content and the curriculum. We wanted to ask if they, a couple things we asked, if the like the content they're learning represents them, if it has diverse amount of cultures and experiences and not just kind of like that white lens point of view. And we ask if they think that the materials they're using are good materials. And then for section D, it's about how I'm learning. So that's kind of about we're asking about the different learning styles and how they're engaged with their learning experience, if they're working with their teacher to create like a learning plan. And then section E is about relating to ABE staff and peers. So in here, we directly ask if they've ever felt discriminated against or disrespected by an ABE staff or peers, or if they feel comfortable at their ABE site. And then section F is just asking more about them. And that's the general demographic questions that we asked in the educator and the administrator survey. But we also asked a couple other things, like how far they have to travel to their ABE site, or if they have kids under their care that makes it difficult for them to come to class. We kind of want to know more about their students than just like their race and gender. We want to know more about them and what could kind of be a barrier for them coming to class. And so I'm really excited to get this sent out, and we're really trying to tell our advisory group to tell their classmates that they've been working on this and that this is an important survey. And yeah, so we're gonna be finishing it up next week, and so look out for that.
Yeah, and I know there's probably going to be some questions about why we didn't translate this, and we did talk about it very in depth. And we had emailed Jenny over at SID about how many languages there were that like primary languages. There,
Yeah.
I think it was like 7 or 9. So we didn't have the resources to be able to translate the survey into 7, 9 different languages. And also, I think a majority of these languages, they might be third world countries, or these students might never have even learned how to read and write in their language, and they're going to probably have somebody read it to them anyways. And so we thought, well, let's just, instead of opening that can of worms, let's just keep it English and keep it very simple. And that we give teachers opportunity to help the students with this. And so that's why we decided to do that. Also, completing the survey, we are going to keep it on Google Docs with exception to the DOC. We'll make sure that there is a printable version of that. And our reason for keeping it on Google is because for one format is when we were doing the advisory application, we gave people a lot of different options to apply, and Addy and I had to sift through and make sure that we got everything. Like, this was emailed, this was faxed to us, this was on Google. Did you get it? This was a phone call, interview. And so, yeah, it did. And it was really hard for us to try to make sure that we got everything and we didn't exclude anybody. And so we thought, this way, let's just, keep it one with the exception of the DOC paper copy. All right, thank you. Next one. All right, so upcoming year's activities. So we are getting together the learner focus group. And the reason we are doing a focus group just for the students is that we aren't, like, as we said, we aren't able to be as expansive, as detailed as we were with the administrator and the educator. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of get more personal with the students and really hear their stories. So we are going to be holding 2 learner focus groups in June. One is going to be in the metro. So Addy and Rose are going to get together, and possibly it could be in Roseville. We're still looking at a location, getting that down, and it's going to be in June, beginning of June. We haven't finalized the virtual one yet, but that one will be virtual, probably rural Minnesota. And we're thinking about 15 for each. So again, if you know any students that would be great for their focus groups, we are paying them a little stipend for joining our focus group. And then we're going to be finishing analyzing that, because right now all we have is our administrator data that we've analyzed so far, and we want to get into the learner. And then once we are, or not the learner, educator, once we send the learner out, we get that. And then presenting the data. It's going to be fun to figure out how to get all that in there. So I do love graphs and pie charts, so I'm excited about that. And then making any policy recommendations to the MDE team. And I've kind of mentioned here and there, we did get the Land Anti-Racism Committee. They are joining our advisory meetings, and they might be able to take on some different focuses that come up as we are analyzing information, and they can take and work on that too. So, and then PD recommendations of what can we do what do we need to offer more for our ABE community to either provide people with the tools or be able to give our students the tools and give them what they need in terms of equity. And I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I don't think so. But yeah, like we said before, our new advisory groups will be starting in August. So we're really looking forward to getting that started as well.
Yeah, and Addy and Rose have decided to join me for another year. They are not sick of me yet, so we are going to be stuck like glue for the next year again. So really excited to have my team, because we just work really, really well together. So if you have any questions, you can definitely, since we're kind of a small group, you can just turn your camera and your mic on, or you can put it in the chat if you're feeling kind of shy. All right, are we going to get off easy?
We like to talk, so feel free to ask.
I'll just say that I'm really excited that both Addy and Rose are going to be around for more of this work. I know that's kind of a trick sometimes with grant funding, is positions are sort of temporary, but yeah, it's been great to have the current team doing the work this year, and it's good to know that same folks will be around for a little while longer.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a lot of data we're sifting through, and we were kind of, there were some, comments that just kind of blew us away of like, wow, I didn't know people felt like that. And it's good in that, and it kind of reaffirms why we're doing what we're doing, is that we're not all on the same page, and we don't all have the same idea of what equity is and how to do work for it. Equity is just something that's trend right now, like, oh, everybody's doing equity, but really, what does it mean? We want to scratch more than just the surface. We want to learn about it and give people tips and ideas and resources of what can you do to change it and apply it in your own programs.
And we're hoping that with all this information that we get, we're going to kind of convince people, because this kind of work, it's hard work, and it's going to take some convincing to get everybody on the same page. So I'm hoping that with all this data that we gather, it's going to be very convincing that this work is important and it needs to keep going. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming and listening after lunch. Hope we didn't make you fall asleep.
Right. Thank you, C and Addy, so much. I am so excited I'm sure there's lots of other people who came here who are also so excited to get to see what you pull together and see where this project goes in the next few years. So, on behalf of the ABE community, thank you for doing this work. And thank you also to Jodi and everybody at the Department of Education for seeing the importance of this and funding it. That's fantastic. All right, and I hope you're looking at the chat and seeing all of the thank yous and wonderful comments that are rolling in.
We appreciate the support.
We do. Thank you.
All right, we are at 12:59. Does anybody have last call for questions and comments? All right, I'm going to go ahead and close down our session. The next session begins at 1:15, so you have 15 minutes to do anything that you need. Take care of yourself. Astrid has chatted out the flyer so that you can find it right there in the chat, so you know where you're going to go next. And I'll give everybody a minute to click on that flyer. All right, and then thank you so much, C, Addy, and Jodi, and Astrid. Everybody enjoy the rest of the conference, and we'll see you at more equity sessions in the future.
Ready. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thanks, Astrid.
And Astrid.
Good job, Jodi.